Hello, this video will be about slightly more advanced modeling in Blender. I went over the very basics of navigating in Blender in another video series that I believe I shared. Yes, I did. I did within each group. I apologize. So first things first, I'd like to enable a couple of add-ons that we have a little bit better better control over modeling. These add-ons just add slight few tools that are very helpful. So if I go up here to Edit, Preferences, and you'll most likely be thrown up here at Interface if you go down to Add-ons and change the category here from All to Mesh. I'd like you to enable Edit Mesh Tools, Mesh F2, and Mesh Loop Tools. Once you have these checkmarked, they'll save and be automatically enabled in every single version of Blender if you save this scene. However, if you don't save this scene, they'll uncheckmark themselves or unenable themselves, I believe. So just make sure that we have them in the future. Let's go down to these three bars, go up to Save Preferences. Autosave Preferences should catch this, but it usually only saves the preferences when you save the file. Kind of odd functionality, and I believe it's a glitch that they'll be fixing. An error, a glitch. I don't know anymore. I can't speak. So from here, feel free to exit out of Blender Preferences. And you'll see, of course, that not much has changed. These are small add-ons that just enable a little bit more control. So, before I actually get into modeling, I would also like to change my viewport a little bit, just because it's stuff I'm comfortable with. So if you go up here to the top right, click down on this this arrow, go down to Cavity, and this will come up with probably Screen. I personally find it best if I change it to both, and you can see now that this changes a slight bit of the visual representation of the geometry. When I'm finishing up modeling, I usually turn that off so I can see it in a different way, or, mess with these settings a little bit more. And of course, feel free to see exactly what each button does, as I'm trying to go more into the concepts than the physical application of all the nitty-gritty parts. Alright, so in here I'm going to switch over to edit mode by pressing Tab. You can also go up here and manually switch the mode. And you'll see that a lot of tools pop up on the left side. I'm going to be using mostly key shortcuts, as they're what I'm used to and what I've used for years. And if I fail to mention any of them, they should pop up down here, because I'm using screencast keys, as you can see. So one of the most basic functionalities within modeling is to extrude. To extrude in Blender, you just simply press E and extrude. There you go. And there you go. You of course have a few settings down here that I apologize are being covered up by the screencast keys. You can change the orientation, flip the normals, move X, Y, and Z, so on and so forth. You can also do proportional editing, but I would not use that, as it's slightly odd within the extrude function. I'm still trying exactly to see it, as it's a rare thing I almost never use. I must use all of Blender's tools as they come. And it's only in a very rare case where I have to go down here and adjust things. So from here, I'm just going to press G with the face selected and move it up. If you want to switch in between selection of vertices, edges, and faces, you can press these buttons up here, or you can press 1, 2, and 3. Next, I'm going to select these two faces on the side, press I to inset, and extrude, and they'll inset separately. Sometimes they inset together, and you can simply switch between the two modes by pressing I again. So now I'm just going to have these in, and then I'm just going to press E and extrude them inward. So now you can see that we have a basic bookshelf. But pulling back a little bit to size, this bookshelf is extremely large. Each one of these units in Blender comes prepackaged or preset to meters. 1 meter is approximately 2.4 feet, 2.5 feet, maybe more. I do not remember. But because I'm a filthy American, I go up to Scene Properties here and turn, and under Units, I turn Unit System to Imperial. You can see there that there's a slight change. So, I'm sorry, it might have been 3 point something. Anyway, from here, if in any menus, the scale is determined by the length right here, not the viewport resolution, or the viewport grid resolution. So if I turn length to miles, I can now add a cube that, while it stays the same size right here, if I type in here 1 for mile, and you'll see 1 mi, it'll change to 1 mile. However, if I put in 1 foot, you can see that it's been added as 1 foot in radius. And it'll show up here as a fraction or a decimal place of the length determined over here in Scene Properties. Of course, you can see how this becomes useful. If I wanted to, I could go into feet here, or I could go into inches. It seems that there's been a rounding error because it was such a large object that it was being scaled, or a decimal place from. So let me just go in one here, and now it's a perfect foot by foot by foot. If I wanted to, I could go into inches over here and play with the exact inches like that. And it seems that miles has been switched back. So back to inches, you can see that I'm changing it through inches. And it seems that Blender is having a slight error where it keeps changing everything back to inches. Now that I've added the object, most likely it should remain within inches. Yes, that seems to be happening. Okay, my bad. I did not know that was a slight problem. So I'm just going to scale this down, and we can say put it to 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. If I'm creating an object that I want to be a very particular size, what I'll do at times will be to take a 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch cube like this and use it as a ruler by, say, 15, or typing in scale, or pressing S, determining an axis, and typing in the amount of inches. Of course, inches down here, length has to be in inches. If I was to, well, that's only if you're moving. With length in inches here, if I grab face or any other object, and I was to type in a certain distance, such as 1 or -1, or 19, -19, it'll move it based on the numbers that you typed in, based on, or the through the length that's determined right here. I'm sure it's more naturalistic and a very natural thought, and I'm sorry for over-explaining this. So, a couple more things. If I go into top-down view by pressing 7 or any of the other views, or if I'm to use this gizmo up here and click on one of the axes, or if I click on the gizmo, I can use it to orbit, you can see that it goes into orthographic mode, and you can see the grid, that forms everything. You can see that since I changed it to imperial, these are 12 units across by 12 units down. Of course, an inch. Or each one of these are inches, and it creates a foot. Yes. From here, I'd like to show you a couple of other essential modeling tools. So if I press Ctrl R, I can create loop cuts. If I left click with that, you can see that all these loop cuts are being previewed where they're going to be added. If I shift it over and click once again, these are applied. If I press R, scroll up, and then I was to click again and have it so that they're ready to be applied, move it, but once it's back in the center where it was, I can right click, and it'll automatically keep them centered. And of course down here you can slightly adjust everything. You can adjust the fall off factor, what have you. I suggest playing around with it as much as possible. Right now, just so I can show you the mirror functionality, I'm going to add a loop cut in the middle, go into wireframe mode by pressing Z and then going to the left here. And I'm going to press B for a marquee select, and I'm going to select this whole side. Currently I have edges active, but I want faces active, so I'll switch to faces, or I could have pressed 3. If I press B again for marquee select, I'll select all of these faces, press X, and delete faces. So now you can see that I have half of this object in. Now if I go down to this tab, which is the modifiers tab, you can see it looks like a wrench. Add a modifier, and navigate over to mirror. It'll mirror the mesh in one of the cardinal directions, or the object's relative axes. If I go in here, I can change the axis that it reflects on. And now, anything that I do on one side will of course be mirrored over to the other. If I turn on clipping, that means that I cannot, that any mesh that I move cannot go over the boundary line. And of course, you can see that you have a couple of options for changing UVs. However, when you're finished modeling, I like to apply any modifiers and then go through and do the UVs then. Excuse me, for some reason my nasal cavity is filling up. Anyway, from here there are a couple more tools that you probably want to know about that are essential. If I press K, or if I go over here to one of these tools, I believe it's this one, I have the knife tool. This allows me to draw out geometry on the mesh. Blender is very, very nice with any sort of n-gons and anything like that. So if I wanted to go through and I wanted to, say, quickly draw out a sci-fi panel that looks kind of horrible, and then I wanted to straighten these lines up, what I could do would go into edge mode, select these, and if I press scale and then Z, I can scale it vertically and flatten it. Of course, going along any of the other axes to straighten them up. Anyway, so now that I have this, I can feel free to extrude this inward. Modeling team, I'll be showing you destructive and non-destructive workflows, but this can be done through another way that is much easier and much more non-destructive. Once, excuse me, but I'm sure that all of you can sort of think in your mind what knife tool would be useful for in drawing in certain bits of geometry. I find it to be most useful when doing retopology, but it's simply difference of practice and difference of workflows. Anyway, so let me go back into edit mode. If I wanted to, I could go in here, add a couple of loop cuts, and I could clean up the geometry. But once again, Blender is very forgiving. So if I was to add a loop cut back here, I can select these two, and if I press the J button, it'll automatically cut between them. So I can just add a loop cut up here with Control R, select these 2 points, press J, and there we go. So now this is a quad, all quad mesh, except for in here. If I wanted to dissolve an edge loop in such a way that because it's not needed for one reason or another, and it looks like I forgot the n-gon of the back face here, then what I can do is I can have it selected, and making sure that you're in edge mode, I can press Control X, and it'll dissolve the vertices. If I select this area, you can see that when I press Control X, it dissolves these vertices and keeps the faces. However, because of this point up here, it created an n-gon at this location, and now this location in the front. So it's important to keep in mind your edge flow. I'll be going into this with more focus on modeling in a different video, but for a layout, it doesn't have to be pretty at all. Whatever you do, as long as it gets the idea across. That's for blockouts. So I believe those are the basic tools of modeling within Blender. At least box modeling. You of course have more tools over here that you can see, such as ripping, where it separates the vertices, or smoothing, and probably the most important one I should have mentioned earlier is edge slide. So if I place in an edge loop here, instead of moving it back and forth and possibly messing up the UVs, if I press G twice, then it'll edge slide along all of its relative location, or relative to wherever it's trying to go. So if I select this one and I press, not H, if I press G twice, it'll slide along each area. So you can see that this geometry up here is following the path to either its left or to its right. Of course, I can deselect that and just edge loop, and just slide along these areas. An important thing, just generally within Blender and any program, is being able to hide. If you press H with an object selected, it'll hide the object. Then if you press Alt-H, it'll unhide all objects that are hidden. Alternatively, you can go up to this panel up here. This is the outliner, and I ask that we keep this very organized, as I'll make sure to show how to in each individual video for each department. You can turn on and off this object. You can also, you can hide and unhide this object. If you want to completely hide and not be able to unhide a scene collection, you can simply turn it off right here. The scene collection is any sort of grouping or collection of objects, as you might have guessed. So, with a basic understanding of the modeling tools that are available, well, I have one or two other slight things that you'll probably want to see. If I go to face mode, well, if I want to create, or if I want to subdivide this whole mesh, what I can do is I can right click and go to subdivide. This right click is a special menu. So if I right click, I can subdivide. The reason that it looks really wonky like this on my screen is because I have the fractal turned up to 1.6. If I turn that off, and I turn down smoothing, you can see that this object is subdivided once. Any n-gons will not be subdivided. Apart from that, you also have a couple of functionality things from Loop Tools. So if I extrude this object out, turn off clipping within the mirroring, move it over, and let me just quickly fill in this area. So the reason that how I fill in this area is I click this this edge right here, and I'm going to press F once, and through the F2 add-on, it fills in a certain area, or it fills in sort of like a ladder shape going down. Now going through, and I'm just going to quickly subdivide everything. So I can go down, subdivide, so I have more geometry to play with. Then if I select all of these faces, right click and go to Edge Tools, you of course have more tools down here. And if I go to Mesh Tools, you have more tools on this menu. And of course, same thing for Loop Tools. Loop Tools is the one that I'm looking for in this case. I want to circularize. So now any object that, any mesh that you have selected will form a circle. This area looks a little bit wrong, and just having it completely flat and then suddenly it changes to a circle. So if I select this edge loop by holding down Alt and selecting an edge, I can press Ctrl X to dissolve. If I was to press X regularly, it would just simply delete that geometry, as you saw there. And of course, it gives you an option to choose different deletion modes. And of course, there's edge collapse. Edge loops, which dissolves it, same as with Control X. And then you can continue to see where it says dissolve faces. And then up here, there's just flat out delete. All right, removing this weird looking object aside, I'm just going to go back and add a cube. Let me scale it, Let me add the cube and make sure that it's at, let's say 2 feet. 2 feet. There we go, 24 inches. Let me also just feel free to change this in between whatever you find useful. So let me change that to feet. And I'm going to go over the basics of modifiers and then sculpt mode within the next video. Thank you.